to my personalized learning series. Today we're going to cover the human heart and its circulation. Now I've combined three main things in this lesson. One is the anatomy of the heart. Second is the function of the heart and the circulatory system overall as a double circulation. And third, we're going to look at the property of all three types of blood vessels that's found in human body. So this lesson will be suitable for SPM students, chapter 1, transport in humans, and as well as the O-level students. Okay, so if you've seen on the board here, I have 4 chambers. This represents the heart generally. We're going to try to understand that, and obviously it's not looking like a human heart yet, but that's where we're going to get to eventually. Now, I'll just get my ring pen. Okay, so for heart, so I need you to know, 4 sections of the heart. The top sections are the obviously atria, and that's the ventricle. Okay, so this is the 4 sections: atria, ventricle. Now it's obviously on the opposite of me, so if you are looking at this, then this would be the left atria, this will be the left ventricle, this is the right atria, right ventricle. Okay, so we'll put that in bracket. So right, and we'll put here left. Okay, so that's done. Now we're going to look at the 4 major blood vessels that leads to the heart. Now the way I'm going to do this is we're going to try to memorize less and understand more. So you have 4 sections here. There's going to be obviously 4 blood vessels that is connected to the sections, to each sections. Now before we go to the heart itself, there's some keywords that I would like you to remember. This is going to be very, very important, crucial for the lesson. I'm going to put it up on top here. So some of the terms that I like to use will be, if you see the word, if it is 2, in this case, I want you to recall 2. So obviously what am I talking about? We're talking about the blood being pumped to a particular organ. So 2, an organ, means obviously oxygenated blood. Now all your organs would use oxygenated blood to carry out their functions, in exception to one organ, and that would be the lungs. Lungs does the opposite. It takes in deoxygenated blood and oxygenates it. Now 2, which means oxygenated blood, obviously the word artery should come to your mind. So that means 2, when I say 2, that's artery, towards the organ. Now from, obviously the exact opposite, that would be deoxygenated blood, and that would be weight, or the weight. Okay, so we're going to have 2 oxygenated blood and an artery from, which means deoxygenated blood, means blood that comes from the organs are generally deoxygenated because the organs would have used it, remember, in exception to the lungs. Okay, then some key medical terms, I'm going to put it on this side here. Key medical terms, if you see the word lungs is represented by the word pulmonary, liver is represented by the word hepatic, or simply hepa. Kidney is represented by the word renal. General terms that we use. Now let's go back to the heart itself. We're going to start with the left side. You can start whichever side that you like, but you do have to remember at least one blood vessel, and the one that I like to remember is aorta. I'll tell you why I like aorta, mainly because it is one of the largest blood vessel, and usually it has these branches out of it. Aorta also stands, you can see the word A or ta. It's obviously not spelled with alphabets like that, but I like to use that because you can see the word A-R-T, okay, which is also the word that is found on the artery. So I want you to remember it as aorta being the mother of all arteries, which means all of the arteries would come from aorta. At some point they all will branch out from the aorta because they all would carry oxygenated blood, because aorta or artery simply means to the organs, and when we say to the organs, we need to carry oxygenated blood to the organs. All right, so obviously this is going to be oxygenated blood. Okay, oxygenated blood, and it's going to go to the body, so we will kind of develop that in a bit. But the question is, if this is a maze, how do I move? You can see there's a clear separation between the left side from the right side. So the clear separation means this part operates on its own and this part operates on its own. In a normal circumstances, there should not be any blood mixing from the left to the right. So now if blood is going out from here, I'm going to have an entry point to this. The entry point would be here. Now the entry point, obviously the blood will come in through here, it'll enter this section, and then it will go out in this way here. Okay, so we'll talk about the movement in a bit. We're going to focus on the blood vessels still. So I can see that the oxygenated blood is what's going to go out of here. Okay, so oxygenated blood can only come from one place. Where all the organs in your body will be using oxygen, there's only one organ would give you the oxygen, would replace the deoxygenated blood with the oxygenated blood. Now that has to be from the lungs. So I'm going to write here from lungs. Now from lungs, which means this blood vessel is obviously bringing blood from lungs. Now it says, you see the word from, I've tagged the word with the word vein, and we say lungs, it's tagged with the word pulmonary. So this has to be pulmonary vein. Okay, which means it's a vein, it carries generally carries deoxygenated blood, but because it's from the lungs, it ends up carrying oxygenated blood, and pulmonary simply means it's lungs. So vein means from pulmonary lungs. But remember, this is the only vein that's in your body, which is an exception. It ends up carrying oxygenated blood instead of deoxygenated, because the lungs is the only organ that replaces carbon dioxide with the oxygen. Okay, so that blood enters the atria. When the atria contracts, blood enters the ventricle. There is a point here that it's in both. So I'm going to put it like that. So the V is a representation of valves. The one that's here stands for bicuspid valve. Bi because it has kind of two flaps. Here it would be tricuspid valve. Okay, obviously bicuspid valve, tricuspid valve, they play the same role. They also have another general name that is known as atrioventricular valve, which simply means a valve that is in between of atria and ventricles. Now the function of both valves, tricuspid and bicuspid, is to control the flow of blood from the region of atria into the region of ventricles. Now how does it happen? Very simple, it is only able to open on one side. See, when blood moves into the atria, the pressure in the atria builds up, and that causes the valve, when the pressure is high enough in the atria, the valve will open and blood will move into the ventricle. And obviously the movement of the blood and the buildup of the pressure is also supported by the fact that the atria contracts before the ventricle. So the contraction of atria takes place, blood will move into the ventricles. As the pressure in the ventricle builds up due to the presence of blood, both of the valves would eventually close. That will prevent the blood from the ventricles from moving back into the atria when the ventricular contraction takes place. Okay, so that's crucial. Please remember, what is the role of any valve, for that matter, any valve. It can be bicuspid, it can be tricuspid, it can be the semilunar valve that is present in the major blood vessels. They would prevent the backflow of blood. Okay, that's key. That's usually a mark in the exam. All right, so okay, let's move on. So pulmonary vein obviously brings blood from the lungs into the left atria, and from the left atria blood gets pumped into the ventricles. From the ventricles, when ventricle contracts, it pumps blood into aorta. Now we know aorta is the mother of all arteries, or at least that's what I like to call it, and aorta would stand for since it's mother of all artery, which means it's 2. So in this case, where do you think oxygenated blood would go? It needs to go to all the organs of the body. So here I will just put a box to represent organs. So all the organs except for lungs. And I don't know if I have a green ink left. Maybe we can also represent lungs in this part here. So that's lungs. So I use green. That's obviously because it's going to do the opposite role of the other organs. So I will just, the understanding of this can be other organs. It can be liver, it can be kidney, it can be a digestive system. So all of these other organs are here. And your muscles in general, even your brain goes under this category. Lungs is separate because it's going to do the opposite. Now what happens is the aorta obviously would come out here and it would branch. So let me make that a little bit neat. So it branches into smaller ones that we call as the arteries. So let me make that a little bit smaller. So that comes down here and that would be artery. Now obviously artery being connected to aorta and aorta being connected to ventricles. Ventricle has the hardest job between all of the four sections here, is obviously because it needs to pump the blood to all over the body. That means from up here all the way to down, all the way to the top, it does need to generate a large amount of pressure. As a result, generally the wall of our ventricles are much thicker. So we have very thick wall, put it here. Why do you have a thick ventricular wall on the left? Because you need to generate a very strong pressure to be able to pump blood to all over the body. So aorta to artery. So now talking about the property of artery, remember we had 3 goals. One of the goals is to understand the way the blood vessels are structured, the anatomy of the blood vessel itself. Artery being the major connector to aorta, receiving high pressure blood, artery needs to have a thick wall. So automatically when you have a very thick muscular wall, so I put here, this is obviously the thick muscular wall. So why do you need thick muscular wall? Because you contain high pressured blood. Why do you have high pressured blood in the artery? Because the ventricles has a very thick wall, the left ventricle to be specific, it needs to pump blood to large distances against high amount of friction. It generates a very high pressure blood. Okay, so I'll put here high pressured blood. Okay, high pressured blood, obviously oxygenated, because remember I put here oxygenated. So the blood comes down through the artery. So thick muscular wall, it also has elastin fiber, is the reason why it's able to recoil to maintain a certain amount of pressure as it's as it's supplying the blood to organs. That's the reason if you put your finger at the groove of your wrist here, you would be able to feel a bit of pulse. Okay, that's because of the recoil due to the presence of elastin fiber. So I'll just put that as well, elastin fiber. Okay, so automatically when you have a thick muscular wall, you will have a very small lumen. Maybe I can put that inside. Small lumen. If it's not clear, probably you can just zoom in. That small lumen, which is a sacrifice when you have a thick muscular wall. So then artery connects obviously to organs, but how exactly blood is supplied? Now blood is supplied, I just put here organs, at the point of supplying oxygen or other nutrient substances to the body tissue. The artery will branch further into smaller vessels that are known as capillary. So here I'm just trying to represent capillary. Capillary are really tiny. So these are capillaries. They're really tiny, and the structure of capillaries are what we call as generally made up of, I'm just drawing it big so that it's obvious. It's so small that it is made up of thickness of a cell, or we simply call it as one cell thick wall. Now having one cell thick wall, it kind of encourages rapid diffusion of gaseous substances. That is obviously rapid diffusion of oxygen. when you say there is going to be rapid diffusion of oxygen to the body tissue, to the organs, you will also obviously have rapid diffusion in of the carbon dioxide. I'm just trying to think. Okay, so CO2, I'm using red. So CO2 goes into the blood vessel. You can see how oxygen is going out to the organs, and CO2 from the organs that is produced from the respiration are going into the capillaries. Now, this happens in all over your organs, your muscle tissues, your skeletal muscles, smooth muscles, name it. They're all going to receive their oxygen nutrients through this way, diffusion. Now, that's possible again because capillaries are one cell thick. The point of attachment of capillaries, or the starting point of capillaries which branches from arteries, are generally called as arterioles. Alright? Okay, then what happens, you can see highly oxygenated blood is obviously flowing here, oxygenated, and then obviously the organs use up the oxygen, they kind of replace the oxygen with CO2, so you will have deoxygenated blood flowing out. So just going to branch it out. So the ending of the capillary here would be called as the venule. Obviously that's going to connect to vein. So vein is going to go and connect to this part here. Vein. So venule are branches of the capillaries, and they connect to a much larger branch, vein, that's almost homologous to the artery. So we have vein here. Vein, on the other hand, carries a deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood. So I'm going to use a blue ink. I've been using the red ink for the oxygenated. We'll use the blue ink for the deoxygenated. Now, you can see here, when I say vein, that tags with the word from. So here vein, which means blood from the organs, and this blood are generally deoxygenated. So deoxygenated blood will obviously flow through here. Now, we need to think about a few things here. Blood that came from the artery is high pressure, but when they go through capillaries, which are really tight space, the space is so tight here that the red blood cells are all going to line up one by one to get through. They get squeezed to a certain extent. They lose their pressure. So you lose your pressure, you're going to become deoxygenated. That means automatically you are slowed down. So the pressure of the blood here is low. So low pressure. Now that's a big problem because the low pressure blood will have to come up to your heart again so that it can be pumped to the lungs to become oxygenated. Now that's a problem because now you're going against gravity. So how can we help blood move in the vein against the gravity? So you need to remember some of the properties of vein that will help in the movement of blood. First, let's look at the structure of vein. Now the structure of vein, there's the structure of the vein. In this case, I'm just going to draw it out. The structure of vein, generally it has very large lumen. So the lumen is much bigger relatively against the artery. Very large lumen. So you can see that lumen is quite big. Why is the lumen bigger? Because the wall are thin. So it's thin walls. Obviously it's muscular, it has muscle, but it's thin. It has large lumen. But what's a bit more special is the fact that it has valve. Alright, there is a presence of what we call as a semilunar valves. Okay, so the presence of the valve will, I'm going to draw it aside here. The presence of the valve in the vein, so you can see that the presence of valve will ensure that the blood can only flow through one direction, the same as what I've explained earlier. So the blood will, when it gets obviously squeezed, it will move from one section to other section and will not be able to move backward. That kind of makes sure the blood only moves in one direction. Now, that's one. But the second question is, then what squeezes the blood? Very simple. The vein is located very strategically between joints and your skeletal muscle. So every time you move, your skeletal muscle will squeeze the vein and the blood will end up moving section by section until it reaches the heart. So veins are usually pretty obvious. You can see they're above, they're near your joints. As I flex here, you can probably see the veins here get squeezed. They are usually placed here on top here, and as we move they get squeezed and the blood are usually pushed towards the heart. Arteries, on the other hand, they're bigger, they are, they're a lot more high pressure, they are located a little bit deep inside our body. Okay, so that's the veins. I'll just repeat back for the record. This is a picture of a vein. It has thin wall, there's a large lumen, and the lumen contains valves. The valve prevents backflow of blood. That's the same for all the valves. The name would just differ depending where you find them. Okay, now the blood will move all the way, and all the veins that you have, obviously it's a very simple picture, simple representation. You have many veins. They all will branch together to form the larger component called vena cava. So right, okay, so vena cava. So like how I like to remember aorta as the mother of arteries, I would like to remember vena cava. As you can see, that's the tone vein in it, as the mother of all veins. All right, all the veins will combine to form vena cava that obviously connects to the right atria. So you have your deoxygenated blood moves obviously through the vena cava into the right atria, and when right atria contracts, the blood will move into the ventricles. Remember, both contraction of atria happens at the same time, contraction of ventricle happens at the same time, even though you're learning the sequences of the events happening on the left and right side separately, but you have to remember they happen simultaneously, and they happen pretty fast too. So blood moves into the atria obviously through vena cava, and then it gets pumped into the ventricle. Now when the ventricular contraction takes place, the deoxygenated blood has to obviously go out. Now go out to where? Where do you think deoxygenated blood can go? Deoxygenated blood can only have one destination. It has to go somewhere where it can get oxygenated, otherwise it is pretty useless, right? So you're gonna have the blood gets pumped all the way out to, remember, to means I'm gonna put the word artery. So let's put the word artery. Artery. To where? Obviously this is to lungs. So, sorry, I'm gonna take that. This is to lungs. I'll use a different color. Probably use blue. So to lungs. Obviously, why are you going to lungs? This is deoxygenated blood. So deoxygenated blood can only have one purpose. It needs to go and get oxygenated. So it gets pumped to the lungs. Obviously, the name of the blood vessel would be pulmonary artery. Okay, so pulmonary artery, pulmonary obviously lungs, and the two, since you're going towards the lung, we'll put the word artery. So as you can see, all the artery in your body would carry oxygenated blood, in exception to pulmonary artery. Why? Because blood goes to the lungs to get oxygenated, not the other way around. So just remember, pulmonary artery and the pulmonary veins are the exact opposite of the rest of the artery and rest of the veins that is in your body. Now it goes to the lungs. Obviously, I put the lungs here, so you have the since it's gonna get a bit messy, I'll try my best to kind of make it as clear as possible. So we'll do that. So we're gonna turn. So as you can see that this blood vessel is obviously going to the back of the heart. I'm gonna bring it down here, connect it here. Okay, so that's the lungs. And then obviously in this respect, it's gonna go out and kind of connect there. Okay, there you go. So the blue represents, oh sorry, that's black. The blue represents the deoxygenated blood. That's gonna turn and that's gonna come down here. Remember, the blood vessel is at the back of the heart. It's gonna go to the lungs, and this is where what happens in the lungs. I can't find my green marker. Oops, okay. So I'll just put here lungs. So again, it branches down to capillaries. So you're gonna have capillaries here. Same, it's capillaries. And what you have is a diffusion of the CO2 diffuses out, So CO2 diffuses out and O2 diffuses in. Oxygen diffuses in to the blood. So what you have is oxygenated blood will return into. So remember pulmonary vein. So oxygenated blood will go in. Obviously this is going to go to the pulmonary vein. And remember this is the pulmonary artery. So pulmonary vein will be receiving oxygenated blood. Alright, so I'm running out of space. I probably can put here oxygenated blood. Okay, alright. So it's kind of messy, but quick recap of the important points. In this diagram, we have covered the structure of the heart. We have also talked about the property of three major blood vessels. And the last part here, I'm going to point out how this is a double circulation. So you can see how the left side and the right side are clearly separated by this wall here. We call that as the septum. So probably I can put it here. Septum. Septum is kind of has the word separates the two parts of the heart. So this is the septum. You have the oxygenated blood flow, which is on the left obviously, and you have the deoxygenated blood flow, which is on the right. You can see the oxygenated blood flow, goes through the aorta from the left ventricle, it goes through the aorta, and then it goes through the arteries to the organs. And at the capillary, the gaseous exchange takes place. The oxygenated blood becomes deoxygenated. CO2 diffuses out to the body tissues. CO2 from the body tissues diffuses back into the blood vessel, and that then moves through the vein with the help of semilunar valve and the action of squeezing by the muscles. Remember, muscles. Blood will move back into the vena cava. Here is low pressure, so your lumen is large. You don't need such a thick wall to kind of hold the blood in because the pressure is low, and having a large lumen also helps reduce the friction. So the blood vessel vein would connect to vena cava, and that goes to the right side of the heart. So you can see how the right side of the heart handles deoxygenated blood. There is no mixing of deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood in the heart. So from the right side, it gets pumped to the pulmonary artery, which then goes to the lungs. In lungs, the opposite gaseous exchange takes place. CO2 diffuses out and the O2 diffuses in. Now that would be the whole thing. So I've covered basically the structure of the heart, the anatomy of the heart. We talked about the presence of the valves. I just want to add there's one more place that you can find valve, that is at the major blood vessels. Alright, so they obviously have different names, like for example the valve that's present in the aorta is generally called as the aortic valve, but that's okay, you can just remember them as semilunar valves as well. That's acceptable for SPM. Now remember, that's the left side of the heart and this is the right side of the heart. The left side of the heart usually have a thicker wall because it needs to generate a very high pressure blood, because you need to send it far. The lungs on the other hand is located right behind the heart, which is pretty near. So the left side wall is not that thick. And the other thing that you want to remember is because you are generating very high pressure, the blood vessel connecting to aorta, which is arteries, need to have very thick wall. They don't need valves because they are high pressured, so blood will move on its own. There you go, that's the whole thing. So if you do have questions, you just leave it in the comment section. Thank you.